Good afternoon. Welcome to the 9th Tiang Seng Distinguished Lecture Series titled Poetry and the Unquiet Mind. My name is Gia. I will be your MC today. Thank you for taking the time to join us online. Kindly note that this event will be recorded for archival and marketing purposes. NUS and our partners may use some of the images and videos in online and print publications. Should you require any assistance during the webinar, please feel free to use the chat function and my colleague will be assisting you. We will also be doing a Q&A sessions after the webinar. So please click on the Q&A buttons below the Zoom and type in your questions. Without further ado, I would like to invite the Tan Yok In professors in psychiatry and neuroscience at the National University of Singapore, Vice Chairman of Yeo Boon King Mind Science Center, Emeritus Professor Kwa Ee Kyok to give the opening address. Professor Kwa, please.
Thank you, Gia. Good afternoon to all of you. We know that there are viewers from as far as America, Australia, UK, and also the region here, Hong Kong, Indonesia, Malaysia, and of course, Singapore. It's a beautiful Friday afternoon here in Singapore. And before I begin, I would like to say a few words about the late Mr. Tiang Seng. And this distinguished series has been donated by son, Mr. Tao Hing Tan. The late Mr. Tiang Seng was a pioneer here in Singapore just before the war. He came as a young man from the Chinese island of Hainan and worked as a ship steward for the British Merchant Navy. And he instilled in his children a sense of care, compassion, and generosity. And we are very thankful to the family. This is the 9th lecture, and we have 3 wonderful speakers here. The first speaker is Professor Femi Oyebode. He's now in Hong Kong, although he's based in the UK. Professor Oyebode is born in Nigeria, and he's trained in psychiatry in the UK, and a professor of psychiatry in Birmingham, has written extensively in psychiatry and also in poetry. And we met last autumn in Vienna in a conference, and he told me about his interesting work. And I thought we should have him here for our webinar. So beaming from far away from Hong Kong is Professor Femi Oyebode. Femi, is all yours now.
Thank you. Thank you very much for your kind introduction. I'll just share my screen before I start properly. Good. So I hope everybody can see my screen. So I'm delighted to be here, and I first of all want to thank Professor Kwa for having thought about me to invite me to do this, and Professor John Wong as well for asking me to do this. And I'm very, very pleased. I'm very privileged to be delivering the keynote address. So I'm going to be talking about poetry, and I'm going to start off with some introductory remarks. I thought that it's probably helpful just to remind ourselves of the aims of the distinguished lecture series. And the idea of it, of course, is to speak to developing mental resilience across all ages, and it was established in 2019. And my task is to try to bring the subject of the medical humanities to essentially to address the work of the center. And the use of the medical humanities in medicine, the aim is to humanize medicine by firstly drawing attention to the importance of subjective experience, to the scientific and technological aspects of medicine. And secondly, by affirming the humanity of people who suffer either from physical or mental illness. And this in turn will act to sustain people during periods of frailty. So I'm hoping that because that is the whole purpose of medical humanities, that this speaks directly to addresses the issues that the center wish to be addressed. In today's presentation, I will draw on the poetry of people who have suffered so that we fully appreciate the extent of their suffering, whilst at the same time recognizing the degree to which human beings are able to transcend their limitations. And there's no doubt, I hope, that the wonder and the beauty of the language that these extraordinary poets deploy is indeed a marker of their greatness and resilience. So I'm hoping that at the end of my talk, that we come to see that even though the poets are speaking about suffering, but that what we get out of it is the idea that they are actually transcending, and we're seeing the capacity, the ability of human beings to overcome the difficulties that we sometimes suffer. So the goals of literature in medicine, and which is another way of saying the goal of poetry in medicine, is to teach doctors, physicians, lessons about the lives of patients. And not all the people I'm quoting were patients, but nonetheless, it gives us an idea of the inner life of somebody who's suffering. And the literary accounts of fiction and poetry also allows doctors to see the power implications of what they do. And there are other aspects of what the whole business of the medical humanities are, which I'm not going to be focusing on today, but I've just put them on the slide for completion. So as you listen to my talk, and as you listen to the poems that I read, what we're trying to do is to try to understand what people who are sick or ill, what they worry about, how they live their lives around their diseases and their suffering, and how doctors, how the material that I read will help doctors to understand the experiences that people have and help them to understand how to give meaning to the suffering that people have. And obviously, there's no doubt at all that literature in all its forms is unsurpassable, because they've got this ability to communicate in wonderful language to help us to properly understand the things that concern most human beings most: relationships, suffering, and death, and the human condition. So I'm hoping that is the kind of outcome. And I want to start, I think it's appropriate to start with Kobayashi Isa, who's a Japanese writer, poet, born in 1763 in a small farm in central Japan. And he had a difficult childhood, and his mother died when he was 2 years of age, and he was brought up by his grandmother until he was 7. And then his father remarried, but sadly, his stepmother didn't like him, and eventually he became homeless. And he's regarded as one of the 3 major haiku poets of the classical Japanese period. But I'm focusing on him today, and I'm just going to introduce this. So I'm quoting him directly. His daughter died, and he said, "It is often said that the greatest pleasures result in the greatest misery. But why is that my little child, who's had no chance to savor even half the world's pleasures, who should be green as new needles on the eternal pine, why should she be found on her deathbed, puffy with blisters, raised by the despicable god of smallpox?" So you can get a sense of the intensity of the feeling of the loss of a child. And we recognize, all of us, especially in our trade, in our psychiatry, and also in psychology, that the death of a child is the most tragic of deaths that humans experience. And Isa, he quotes other poets, so he doesn't actually write. He writes prose about the experience of his daughter, watching his daughter die, but he then quotes other poets. So I've just taken 2 poets that he's quoted, and they are obviously writing in haiku. So he quotes Rakugo, who says, whose also child died, and Rakugo says, "I searched the faces of dancing children, looking for one like my child's." And you see this wonderfully evocative poem, which gives us a sense of what it is like when one loses a child. And Sampu also wrote a haiku, which says, "After the full moon, I watched it wane night by night, no consolation." So you get the intensity and the unvarying aspect of the experience of grief. So I want to move on, and I've got little headings which lead us into the poems and the poets that I want to talk about. So there are poets who have been in psychiatric hospitals, and they write about the experience of what it is like to be in a psychiatric hospital. And Elizabeth Jennings, who's now passed away, is born in Boston, 1926, Boston in the UK, not in America. And her father, she was born into a medical family, so her father was the chief medical officer, and she studied English at St. Anne's College in Oxford and became a librarian. And she was contemporary with other poets. You're more likely to know about. So Philip Larkin and Gunn and Amis and other writers of that kind. And she spent a bit of time in hospital, and that's interesting to see. So she writes about what it is like to be in a hospital. So she says, observe the hours which seem to stand between these beds and pause until a shriek breaks through the time to show that mankind is suffering still. Observe the tall and shriveled flowers, so brave a moment to the glance. The fevered eyes stare through the hours and petals fall with soft footprints. A world where silence has no hold except a tentative small grip. Limp hands upon the blanket's fold, minds from their bodies slowly slip. And most of us who are clinicians, are nurses and psychiatrists and psychologists who've been on psychiatric wards or in hospital wards of any kind, we recognize this straight away and recognize what it is like to be in hospital in that sort of situation. And this is describing what it was like for her to be in the psychiatric hospital, and she's describing the sitting room. And she says, it is as if a scream were opened wide, a mouth demanding everyone to listen. Too many people cry, too many hide and stare into themselves. I'm afraid there are no life belts here on which to fasten. The only hope is visitors will come and talk of other things than our disease. So much is stagnant and yet nothing dies. And I love this poem. I read it, and I read it to medical students, essentially to emphasize the incredible worth and the importance of visitors, not just in psychiatric wards, in hospitals in general. The degree to which the meeting with the visitors, who are relatives or friends or children of the patient, bring in something fresh, something renewing the spirit, and how valuable that can be. And then, of course, in that subject, we are the only subject in medicine where people are detained, where they're ill but they're not aware they're ill, which then means that we have to force them. So we use the legislation, the mental health legislation. And so I've just called that administering madness. And Robert Lowell, who was an American poet who's passed away now, was born in 1917 in Boston, the USA, and he went to Harvard for 2 years, but left to finish at Kenyon College in 1940, and was a conscientious objector, and is known, recognized to suffer from bipolar disorder, and was repeatedly hospitalized, and he died at the age of 60 from myocardial infarction from a heart attack. And he was an Anglophile, so he spent a lot of time in London and in England. And this particular poem that I'm going to read a bit of it to you is written about when he was detained, and when the people who came to detain him came into his house, and he calls them visitors. So the poem is called Visitors. And he says, to no good, they enter at angles and on the run. 2 black verticals are suddenly 4, ambulance drivers in blue serge, or the police doing double duty. They comb our intimate, messy bedroom, scrutinize worksheets, illegible with second thoughts, then shed them in their stride as if they own the room. They do. They crowd me and scatter, inspecting my cast-off clothes for clues. They are fat beyond the call of duty. I follow my own removal stiffly, gratefully even, but without feeling. Why has my talkative, teasing tongue stopped talking? So you got this. It's a wonderful poem for people who are involved in the detention of others, but who may not be as sensitive to how intrusive and how worrisome that experience is. And you can see Lowell describing what it was like for him. And the last line, of course, is speaking to one of the symptoms of bipolar disorder, that somebody can become talkative. So when all of this is going on, instead of being as talkative as he was when he was diagnosed, and when they gave the every reason for detaining him, he became, if you wish, unable to speak. So he says, why has my talkative teasing tongue stopped talking? So to talk about the illnesses themselves, and I'm not going to read all of this, I just want to touch on this. So this is Lowell, who is writing about George III, who was the English king at the time of the American War of Independence. And of course, he's well recognized as having been very mentally ill during that period. And well, he had episodes of illness, a dispute about the nature of the illness. and we're not going to be delayed by discussing what kind of mental illness he had. And Robert Lau wrote about him. He says, poor George, afflicted by two congresses, ours and his own, that regularly and legally had him flogged. Once young George, who saw his lost majority of our ancestors dwindle to a few inglorious Tory refugee diehards who fled for him to Canada, to lie relegated to the hash heap, unvisited in this bicentennial year. Not a lost cause, but no cause. In 1776, George was still King George, the one authorized tyrant, not yet the mad, bad old king who whimsically picked the pockets of his page. It paid to sleep all day outside his door, who dressed like a Quaker, who danced the minuet with his appalled apothecary in Kew's garden, who did embroidery with the young court ladies and criticized them with suspicious bluntness. It was his sickness, not lust for dominion, made him piss purple. So that's Lowell describing what it must have been like for George III. And John Clare, one of the famous English poets who is always taught on is in the canon, so he's always taught at university, and he was born to a small labouring family in Northamptonshire, and very little education. He was practically illiterate, so very little education, but of course highly gifted writer. And in 1837, he was admitted to mental hospital in Epping. He escaped, and he wrote an account of his escape, which I regard as the leading and first account of a person who absconds from a hospital, who writes what it was like to be in the hospital, and wrote what it was like to escape and how he went back home. And you can imagine he lived in Northamptonshire, but he was admitted to Epping, so it's quite a long journey. And he spent the rest of his life at the Northampton General Asylum. And I'm just going to read one of his poems, which is a very sad poem, which goes to the very heart of what it's like to be ostracized, the stigma of mental illness, which we all of us recognize, whichever culture we live in or come from. And this is one, this is him speaking of what it was like to be rejected by his family. And he says, I am, yet what I am none cares or knows. My friends forsake me like a memory lost. I am the self-consumer of my woes. They rise and vanish in oblivion's host like shadows in love frenzied stifled throes. And yet I am and live like vapors tossed into the nothingness of scorn and noise, into the living sea of waking dreams, where there is neither sense of life or joys, but the vast shipwreck of my life's esteems. Even the dearest that I love the best are strange, nay, rather stranger than the rest. So you've got the sadness of the rejection. And of course, even though he's writing this so long ago, we all know that that sort of experience is still going on in today's world. So I thought I'd read that just to give us the sense of what the abandonment and the being ostracized by family and friends, what that feels like to the person who is being abandoned. And Burnside, I like this poem. Burnside's a contemporary poet, is a year younger than I am. He was born in 1955 and read English and European languages in Cambridge, and he spent time at Fulbourn. But the poem he's written that I'm reading to you, I'm just reading a bit of it, I think, is a poem which takes us all the way back to what asylum life was like in the old days, when people were there in large numbers, thousands in these hospitals. Yet there was an attempt by the wider community to come in at least once a year to try to make life more humane for people. And it was well recognized that in a lot of asylums, they had this annual asylum dance, and Burnside is writing about it. So I just read a bit of it, I think. At one time, I looked forward to the dance, wandering back and forth in the quiet heat of an August morning, packing the car with cupcakes and lemonade, boxes of plums or cherries, petit fours, nuts and spice cake, mousse and vol au vents. At noon, I would go upstairs to wash and change, Sunday best, a clean white shirt and tie, while mother made her face and fixed her hair. It was something we did every year in that backwater town, abandoning our lawns and flower beds to meet the patients out at Somerswood. It seemed a privilege to be allowed within those gates and to know we might return to see the meadows striped with light and shadow, the silent lake, the falling cedar trees. We went there for the dance, a ritual of touch and distance, webs of courtesy and guesswork, shifts from sunlight into shade. And when the patients came downstairs to join us smiling, utterly polite, in newly pressed clothes like cousins twice removed. They had a look of people glimpsed in mirrors, subtle as ghosts, yet real, with the vague good humor of the lost. How we appeared to them, I can only imagine. Too solid, perhaps, too easy with ourselves. So that's talking about what it was like with people going in, trying to do their best to humanize a very depressing and very bleak environment. And this is going back to classical Chinese poetry, and I'm reading a very, very short poem by Han Shan, who wrote this poem, Poems in Depression at Wei Village. And it's a wonderful poem, very sparse, which is not unusual, as I'm sure a lot of people listen to me know more about Chinese classical poetry than I do. But a bit like haiku, can be very, very sparse, but nonetheless be very, very intense and very, very deep. And he says, I hug my pillow and do not speak a word. In my empty room, no sound stirs. Who knows that? All day abed, I'm not ill and I'm not even asleep. And those of us who are psychiatrists understand that. We understand the stagnation of what it is like to be depressed. And we understand the inability to do very much, the inability to have motivation to act, and the way that people withdraw into bed. But of course, that doesn't mean that they're sleeping, because of course, insomnia is also a symptom of depression. So I hope, I think I'm in good time. I hope what I've done is to introduce the idea that that literature, and today's purpose is, and because I'm a poet myself, that poetry as a form of literature has incredible value for clinicians, and of course for ordinary lay people too. And if you were to look at literature and poetry in particular in this area of looking at the disquiet that people have, the turmoil that they might have in their minds, the inability sometimes to engage with the world properly, and then if we read the poems of people who've suffered, it gives us a richer understanding, a greater depth of understanding of what it is like to be in these situations. Far, far, far more nuanced, far, far much more interesting than the textbooks that doctors read. So I hope that you found my contribution helpful and interesting. Thank you very much for listening.
Thank you, Professor Oyubude. Some of the hospitals you mentioned, like Fulbourn at Cambridge and Northampton, I worked there for a while and understand the how it is to work even in the asylums, and sometimes being a doctor in a particular asylum, you're also tarnished by the stigma. So our next speaker is someone local, Dr. Rosemary Khoo. Rosemary is a wonderful teacher here in NUS in linguistics, and she's very prolific. Last week when we met for coffee, she brought along a box of poems, for all occasions, for happy times, for sad times, for grief, for aging, whatever you want. Rosemary has written something about it. And even when she went to see her doctor, and the doctor is always late, she didn't write anything against the doctor. She wrote something about the doctor. We hope our patients will do the same thing. In the outpatient clinic, when they're a bit late, we are a bit late, they will get very upset, they write letters or complain against us. But Rosemary is different. She's a very positive woman. She'll sit down and write a poetry about her favorite doctor. So Rosemary, is all yours now.
Thank you, Professor Kwa. Well, I am overwhelmed, and thanks for the honor. I write at leisure, and poetry has been my faithful companion for over a decade. Every Christmas and New Year, I send out my greetings in the form of decorated poem cards to close friends and as greetings on birthdays, anniversaries, weddings, and births. Occasionally, I pen a poem as a tribute to commemorate the passing of a friend. I write poems about my family, my Peranakan heritage, travel, food, love, women, aging, and children's poems. I write from the quiet space within me where according to Wordsworth, the spontaneous overflow of powerful feeling is recollected in tranquility. The quiet space can be a long bus ride or the waiting room of a doctor's clinic. Writing out what bothers my mind is calming. It could be some wrongdoing done to me or something I witness, a quirky twist of fate, the beauty of a place, the pleasure of a surprise, or an act that brings a lump to my throat. Very often, emotion cannot be expressed in its full force in real time. We are expected to contain our emotions and maintain an equable mood. So in life, we set out each day with a face carefully prepared to meet other faces. Writing is a safe way of expressing our feelings, for we can then reflect, imagine, and understand vicariously the experiences of others. For me, it is a journey of self-discovery and self-awareness. Poets have only words as their tools, unlike songs which have music. But words are powerful tools indeed. They can harm and they can heal, because words carve out in our brain the beliefs about ourselves. We can employ words to create our own garden of peace, or we can allow weeds of discord to grow. And actually, we are the gardeners of our own turf. During the COVID pandemic, I wrote several poems of comfort and consolation for myself and for my friends. And even as I write to boost my morale during the days of lockdown of the infection, I realized that my poems helped to bond us in our spirit of compassion and in our fight against the virus. In this presentation, I shall focus on two themes that recur in my poems. I will also read two poems, short ones. They underpin my perception of life and help me to navigate life's challenges in an uncertain future of change. The first theme is my unceasing wonder of an amazing universe that works like clockwork, which convinces me of a divine intelligence at work, controlling the cosmic rhythms. To know with certainty that the sun always rises, that day follows night, tides ebb and flow, and seasons come and go, and there is birth and there is death. The shift between day and night is always a wonder to me. Humans are diurnal creatures, working during the day and sleeping at night to ensure the body's harmony in maintaining health. The poem I'm going to read is entitled New Day and touches on the phenomenon of sleep. The poem begins with a relaxation that comes with sleep, a well-deserved reward after a hard day. The curled lip relaxes as muscles loosen. The night is a comforting blanket of warmth as we shut our eyes, trusting night's stillness and darkness and the promise of dawn, that we will wake up with a body refreshed and energized and ready to begin a new day. As the sun rises, lighting up our surroundings, the problems of the previous day recede. Thus, we welcome the new day, still young and fresh, offering promise and possibilities. The poem ends with an invocation, a prayer to the Creator for the gift of sound sleep, so that we wake up, restored, and recharge once more. I use this poem as an affirmation. It acts like a sleeping pill, but one wakes up fresh. I'll read the poem. New Day. The curled lip uncurling at the encroaching mantle of night, as the encroaching mantle of night bestows its warmth to soften the hard edge of a rough day. Body and soul sink in slumber, beneath its bed cover, to rise at first light, restored once more, with arms outstretched and lips poised to kiss the dewy cheek of a new day, fresh with promise. So grant me the night, deep sleep healing, eyelids shut tight, dead to all feeling, then awaken at dawn, with heart all a-burning. So the world turns on its axis and nothing remains static. An event located in a spot in a moving wheel of time shrinks in significance against a larger backdrop, which brings me to my second theme, that we should treasure the present moment. Since the past cannot be changed and the future is unpredictable, we have only a present moment to do something with, that we should be mindful and make the present time rich and meaningful. We should expect change, which is inevitable in life, and be prepared for it and be resilient. In my second poem, This Too Shall Pass, I dwell on the transient nature of existence, that nothing lasts forever, which includes both good and bad times, and the gift of the moment in time. This poem is easy to listen to. The lines are short and they rhyme alternately. There is musicality in the rhyme and rhythm. To achieve this, I had exercised word economy, played around with sounds and words and word and line sequence. The finished poem is thus a compact composition with all the ideas encapsulated within the lines. I shall read my poem. This too shall pass. How deep the night, how bright the stars. Let in the light to heal the scars, the wounds that cried, the wear and tear, the tears that dried are buried there. The words unsaid where sorrows remain, the promises made that create the pain. No eternity's hand in day's hourglass of trickling sand. This too shall pass. Life's moments beckon, proclaiming the prime of a ripening second in the fullness of time. The first stanza describes the darkness of night and the stars in the sky. Figuratively, when we feel sad, the world is a dark night, but the night sky can be beautiful, with stars as bright as diamonds. Remember the nursery rhyme most of us learned as a child, twinkle, twinkle, little star, how I wonder what you are? Up above the world so high, like a diamond in the sky. So the darkness of the sky is vast and deep, but it is lit up by the brilliance of stars. The second line conjures up the idea of stars, such as wishing upon a star, catch a falling star. And in the third line, we have the scars left by injury, could be external and superficial, but they index a deep internal pain. We may think of the scars of Christ's crucifixion. One's life is never perfect, and there are always cracks and fissures. Through these imperfections and sorrows, we learn about life, about challenges and resilience, humility, courage, determination, and patience. Only through a vessel's cracks can light filter in. The words unsaid speak perhaps of regrets. Unsaid also makes us think of words which have been said, which perhaps should never have been uttered. The fourth stanza mentions eternity. Here, the big picture of existence is juxtaposed with a day's allocation of time in the hourglass of trickling sand. This gives us a perspective of eternity against which events take place. The last stanza concludes with a focus on beckoning moments, the opportunities that exist in each moment. Things will happen when the time is right, and the time could be now, so seize the day. The moment is like a ripening fruit, best eaten when it is exactly ripe, which is the perfect timing. Thus the line reads, the prime of a ripening second in the fullness of time. My collection of poems are colorful and come from a place of light and hope and family values. And even when I write about dark situations like dementia, I try not to make them gloomy and offer a glimmer of hope and a solution or resolution. They serve also to encourage me in my journey through the winter of life. Reading a poem is an interactive process. We take from a poem what we bring to it, our own beliefs and experiences. And each person will derive a different experience from reading it, hence a different interpretation. Some readers will derive meanings unintended by the poet, which are just as valid. That is the fascination of poetry. It is a rich trove of distilled human emotion latent in our soul, reaching the higher self in each of us. It helps to connect us within ourselves and also with others at the highest level, transforming the mundane into something magical, drawing on the power of imagination. Therein, I would say, lies poetry's therapeutic or transformative power for both reader and poet. Thank you.
Thank you, Rosemary. It's beautiful poems you've written. You've touched the hearts of so many people. And they're the theme of mindfulness, Rosemary. And we had this same theme yesterday on mindfulness and nature. So
Yeah.
thank you very much.
Thank you. Thank you, Prof. Kwa.
Our third speaker is Mr. Rick Kobak Song. He was a previous poet in residence at the National Gallery and has written extensively. He's a very well-trained person. Was trained at NUS here and then went on to Cambridge and also at Harvard. And has written a lot of books also on, besides poetry, also on branding, United People. So, Rick Ko, we are ready to hear from you.
Thank you very much, Hyok. And hello, everyone. What I'm going to do is to read just one poem, and I'm going to try to focus my reflections on the connections between poetry and the unquiet mind around this poem. Let me just right. This is the poem that I'm going to read. It's titled Mango Harvest. And for the background of this slide, I've chosen the mango color. I never realized before that this is actually quite a soothing shade. Now, this poem, Mango Harvest, is one of 60 poems in my second collection of poetry titled The World of Wonder, which was published in 2001. It's one of 9 books of mine that feature poetry. The collection is divided into 3 sections. The first section, titled Singapore, are poems about places in Singapore. The second section of the book, titled Outside, are poems from my travels to places ranging from the Lake District in England to Iceland to Mount Fuji, which I will be revisiting next week. The third section of the book is titled Inside, and the poems in this section, where this poem Mango Harvest is located, are poems about the inner life. And I found a quote from the British American poet W.H. Auden, which encapsulates this idea. And this is the quote. I'm quoting W.H. Auden. Choice of attention. To pay attention to this and ignore that is to the inner life what choice of action is to the outer. Now, this poem is actually a tribute to my father-in-law, William Neo. His name, this is not verified because I can't ask him anymore. But I guess he was probably named after the actor, the American actor William Holden, won the Academy Award in 1953. My father-in-law, William, was diagnosed with cancer almost exactly 40 years ago. And after his surgery, he was given 6 months to live. During this period, when he was recuperating at home, he planted a mango tree in a small garden in his house. And he passed away in the summer of 1985. I'm going to read the poem and then tell you a bit about the artistic intent behind the poem. Mango harvest. Lushness of leaves cannot hide this legacy of extravagant announcement. It is harvest time again, and 200 mangoes present a dilemma of flesh. Full flavor comes from expectant restraint, as waiting for wholeness courts the torments of tempest and pest. Plucking before season is the only escape, but gives no more than 3/4 sweetness of near maturity. Strength of spirit cannot resist life's untimely disjuncture. Such is ripeness portion from these periodic fruit of the planter's pains. Gratitude is all. Now, this poem, A Mango Harvest, is the first of many more poems that I would want to write around the nature themes. And yesterday was the International Day of Forests and also World Poetry Day. How apt, because the NUS Mind Science Center has always embraced this bond between nature and wellness. In this poem, I am using mangoes and the harvesting of them as an extended metaphor. Now, trees are, of course, the best symbol of legacy in nature. It is often said that those who plant trees are providing shade for future generations, which they themselves may not enjoy. My father-in-law did enjoy a bit of the shade, but not much. And there's, of course, the fruit from these trees, which is the richest part of that legacy. There are a couple of Shakespearean references in this poem. In stanza 2, there's the use of the word tempest, which is an allusion to the Shakespearean play The Tempest. And in stanza 4, the use of the word ripeness, which is from the play King Lear. And the last line of the play is a rephrasing of probably one of the most famous lines from that play King Lear, gratitude is all. My father-in-law, William, had this favorite phrase of his, which was, it's nature's way. It was his way of explaining the natural rhythm of life, which is impossible to deter. The poem tries to capture and to express this our human struggles with the transience of life, which is an inescapable aspect of existence. It's at the heart of the human condition, which is the purpose of all poetry. And it's also a perennial theme of all verse. One of its most often used and most evocative images from nature is the sakura, the cherry blossom, and the national flower of Japan, which I hope to be able to see on my trip there to Japan next week. Now, these reflections of life were further extended into the rest of my writing of poetry since the year 2001, and definitely into the COVID-19 pandemic years between 2020 and 2022. And out of that period, I had actually 4 books emerged from that, and two of them include books that have poetry and also haiga, which is a Japanese art form combining haiku with a visual art element. One of the books is titled Around the World in 68 Days. It's a book about a trip around the world to 13 countries in 68 days. And also the book, my latest book of poetry titled The World Anew, which includes 32 poems from my time as the poet in residence at the National Gallery Singapore between 2021 and 2022. Out of these most recent reflections, I came to be quite fascinated by the Japanese concept called Ichigo Ichie, which is spelled Ichigo Ichie, Ichigo Ichie. Roughly translated, it means one life, one moment. And the idea is to cherish every moment of our lives, because more often than we realize, every encounter turns out to be a once-in-a-lifetime opportunity. And it struck me that this idea of Ichigo Ichie is in some ways the opposite of the well-known phrase and idea of carpe diem, which is well-known, especially in Western culture. The idea of a carpe diem is to seize the day by practically forgetting about the future, at least for today. But for Ichigo Ichie, it is almost the opposite. It is to seize the day precisely because we are mindful, more mindful of the future, how unpredictable, how transient, and therefore how precious today is. So hence, there's no way we can know the future. All we can do is to be mindful, as this poem ends, with the knowledge and keeping close to this idea that gratitude is all. Thank you.
Thank you.
Yeah. Thank you. Right.
Mr. Rick. Okay, so we've now come to the Q&A sessions. Please feel free to use the Q&A buttons below the Zoom to type in your questions. We already have a few questions coming in, so over to you, Papa.
Yeah. Thank you very much. To cherish the moment, that's what Rick reminded us, and it's wonderful to listen to our 3 friends sharing with us their experiences, own life experiences, the poetry they love, and what they've written. And I really enjoy listening to the 3 of you. Someone had asked me much earlier before the start of this webinar, and I think the first person who asked is Professor Ayub Bode. When you see a patient with, say, a mild depression, do you sometimes, besides prescribing maybe a medication, do you sometimes tell them, read this poetry or read this poem? Would you sometimes encourage them?
Sadly, Professor Kwa, I've never prescribed poetry, but people do bring me their poems because they know that I write myself, and so that's always an interesting interaction. So I had somebody. I'm retired. I'm retired as a clinical psychiatrist in August 2021, but I had a patient of mine put through the door his new volume of poetry, which he'd written with a view to coming to terms with his mother, because his mother's passed away, and he thought when she was alive, he thought she was harsh when they were children. And so this poem is this volume is dealing with that. So that was very interesting kind of. So I just did something like 200 words back as a poet to a poet to a poet, essentially. So that is more common in my experience. People bring in their writing to me rather than me prescribing what they should read.
Our mutual friend, Professor Jeremy Holmes, wrote an article in the British Medical Journal. He shared it with a patient, and the patient wrote something, I think almost like a thesis, on T.S. Eliot's The Wasteland.
Yes.
And it's a very bleak poem. So they appeared in the BMJ about how this patient analyzed the poetry and how much she identified with the trauma of the person who went through. So maybe Rosemary, do you sometimes when you visit your friends who are down, sometime during COVID, they say, well, I've written something on this situation. Would you like to read it? Do you share with them, Rosemary?
That's so interesting because, I send my poems to a few friends, and sometimes they say, I like this poem, or I don't quite like this poem, and I ask them why. And it seems to me they weren't commenting on the poem itself, but on the topic. In other words, if I give them a poem that is cheerful and bringing hope, they say, oh, I like it. And if it is a poem about some dark issue, and then they'll say, I don't like this poem. So in other words, they were looking to poetry as a means of comfort. But once lately, I wrote a poem on critters, critters. And this is actually about creatures, human beings who are nasty and toxic, and they spread their toxins everywhere. Now, when I wrote that poem, it horrified me. And when I decorated it, which is what I like to do, second best, decorating the poem with some graphics, I had black and all the vermin all around, and it was called Critters. And I gave it to my young niece, and she said, oh, I like this poem, Auntie, because this is exactly how I feel. So you see, because I wrote about toxic people and she could relate to it. So really, it depends on your audience, doesn't it? And I have got gloomy poems too. Like, I was so intrigued by your hospital poem, which you read about the mental asylum, Dr. Femi, because I was in hospital about over a year ago, and I stayed there, and I wrote a poem there. And it became longer the longer I stayed. So it did talk about my experiences as a patient. And it ran to about 9 pages, I think. But I don't like to show it to people because I think perhaps maybe to hospital administrators. So I don't think that is a poem of cheer. So I do not disseminate it.
Yes.
Right. So Rosemary is like many researchers, when the results come back, they will not want to publish it. When this result, they tell the world about it. It's bad. Tell them also the administrators must also listen to the bad news. That the waiting time is long, that the toilets are still dirty. They must know something about it. I read something from Rick Cole and about the grandmother. That's really struck me. And so I passed it on to some people, and they could, in a way, Rick, understand how you went through. You want to share with us that about your grandmother and the poetry you sent to us?
Yes, sure. I said earlier that the poem that I read, Mango Harvest, is in a section called Inside. in my book, The World of Wonder. And the first few poems are actually autobiographical. The first one is about how I used like to sketch when I was a very young child. The second poem in this section is this poem, Mango Harvest. The third poem is the poem that you mentioned, Iyok, about Apo, which is about my step grandmother, my memories of her. And the fourth poem, Antique, is actually referencing my maternal grandfather. So yes, these memories are very precious, and they help you to, when you are younger, to come to terms with some of the realities of life, and you build on that in later in life as you encounter similar situations, but with a bit more life experience and a bit more maturity, and hopefully it's also gets reflected in the poetry. The reflections are fuller, deeper, and hopefully also of help to others who may read it, and then something in there strikes a chord with them or resonates with them.
Some of the viewers have asked me about the books written by Professor Oyu Bode, Dr. Rosemary Khoo, and also Mr. Rick Ho. I hope at the end of this webinar, you could also either let us know or send it to Maureen or Gia, the list of books, a bit of marketing here, then so that they'll know how to get it. I know it's so difficult, if Rick didn't give me his book, I wouldn't have known about his poetry. And I was telling somebody that poets they can't become rich people, so they have to give the books to people. Nobody go and stand in queue, so if you all could do, because there are some of the viewers have sent in, how do I get on to Rosemary's book, poems and all that now? Okay, and then that will be wonderful. There's the other lot of questions coming in as someone asked about whether for three of you, writing poetry, does it have a healing process in you? That it was after you write, there's something that that's bottling in all of you, that you write something, it's a bit like a catharsis, that you write this down and you feel a bit better. And any experience to you again, Professor Yobodi? What do you think? Is it a healing process?
It's a wonderful question, isn't it? It's a wonderful question. What writing does for you, and so I can give a general response, which is not specific to me. So there's the idea that if we use the word author, that the idea that if you're an author, you have agency, and therefore you've got control of a description of an account. So I don't think it matters whether it's an entry in a diary, or whether it's a poem, or whether it's a short story or whatever. But what it does for you is that you've got inchoate kind of chaos inside, the turmoil inside, and then you get the form of words, and with the form of words and with the structure and the discipline of writing, which obviously Rosemary and Rick have demonstrated, because they read the poems and then they helped us to understand the art of it, what the actual discipline, the structure that you use in order to ensure that you're not just going on and on in a kind of diffuse sort of way. So yes, in general, the statement is that people benefit from writing. And I don't think that's professional writers alone. I think it's the same for anybody who suffered, who takes control of their life. And then when you read it, one of the surprising things, in my case, is that if you have enough time between the writing and the reading, you can be totally surprised at the insights that you didn't realize you had when you were writing. So that I think it's one of the most extraordinary things, is to discover that unconsciously you've made discoveries that you didn't know about until you reread what you've written. I mean, that to me is just incredible, really, because it then becomes like reading somebody else's writing. So the answer is yes to the question.
Right. Thanks.
Okay,
I think
if I could, if I could, go ahead.
Sure. Rick, carry on.
If I could build on what Professor Oyebode just said, I would say that there are two aspects to the way that a poet learns and gains from the writing of such poems. And the first is therapeutic, and the second is technical. The therapeutic, I think we all have a quite good understanding already, the way in which reading and writing poetry about the concerns that that our mind and hearts struggle with has that therapeutic effect on you. You actually gain and from the process of writing it itself, and also from rereading something that you've written in the past. That's therapeutic. But by technical, I mean that that for example, if you I think as Rosemary mentioned, she uses rhyme and other technical aspects of poetry. I like to use rhyme a lot, but for Mango Harvest, I didn't use any rhyme at all, but it features in a lot of my other poems. And when you have a rhyme scheme, sometimes you have to find a word in, well, one or two lines later that rhymes with a word you've already used. And in the process of that, you might then come upon a word which you might not have thought about earlier or might not otherwise have thought about. So that's what I mean by the technical aspect of learning in the process of writing.
Perhaps I
wonder-
could embellish it a little bit of what
Sure, Rosemary, because I was thinking
it
about
okay?
your
Yeah.
9-page
No,
poem for
I'm
hospital.
not going to talk
I
about
think
that.
whether it helps you in the healing or in the process.
Yes, but first to build on what Rick said, very true, the technical aspects. And in this, I'm helped because I studied linguistics, you know. In fact, I taught linguistics for about 40 years. So it taught me about the structure of language. And so when I write a poem, it is always in my mind that there should be a coherence, a kind of a lexical chaining, and words are repeated using lots of word relations. It could be synonymy, antonymy, homonymy, you know. It could be a different word and the nuances of a word, things like that. And also, I use not just rhyme, it's my friends say, oh, sometimes you sound like George Manley Hopkins. I say, yeah, somehow, you know, it is alliteration, assonance, and then there's metaphor and imagery, all wrapped up together. And this forms a very rich resource. But I'm saying that don't let the technicalities put off people who want to write. I think the first thing is a release, you know. You have this emotion within you, and it is something that you want to spill out. So actually, you are so bothered. This disquietude in your mind, you know, has to be given out some way. And then you write because you are in the grip of this powerful feeling. But the next day you look at it, you say, oh no, this feeling, you know, you sort of modify it a little bit. It is toned down, you refine it. And then later on, you say, it cannot go out like this, it's too gloomy. So what I do is I add a little bit of light at the end. So I don't leave the writer right there or the reader at the bottom. There's a little bit of the uplift. And it is actually also for me, you know, I don't want to be bogged down by the things I write. So actually, it is also a kind of self-medication. Thank you.
No. I was trying to expand on what we mentioned about your 9-page poem about the hospital stay. Whether, as Professor Oyebode mentioned, do you ever get back to read that nine-page poem?
Oh, it's painful to read because it is
painful.
not a complimentary thing.
Okay.
It doesn't complement the institution.
Okay.
It was because I thought the treatment wasn't very good, you know. But while I understood the hassle and the bustle of a hospital, I also thought that there were many, many things, you know, that were not quite right. So I poured it out And that was because I couldn't move. I had fallen, I had fractured my spine. And each time when the doctors come, they wouldn't listen very much. They're so busy. So I say, wait, doc, I've got a poem here. Will you just listen to it? Then after they listen a few lines, they stand there and listen to the whole thing. So I knew then that poetry worked, you know. They listened because they knew it wasn't rubbish.
So
And
it's not just telling them the good news, also telling them the bad news.
and I
And
suppose they were a little
the
bit
truth will set you free, right? So,
intrigued, I
but I
think.
wonder, Professor Oyubade, do you ever ask the patients themselves, as you said, it's quite therapeutic, you know, do you encourage them to write sometimes poetry in England? Are you still doing it?
I mean, some people do, but I don't, to be honest. I don't ask me why not. But some people do, and some people also. There's a guy, I forget his name, is a consultant psychiatrist who came to national attention in Britain, who is a consultant in Liverpool, who set up the reading groups, which took, they became very, very popular very quickly about 20 years ago. And they set them up in general hospitals as well as in psychiatric hospitals and so on. So that's reading groups rather than writing groups.
Okay.
And again, it's exactly the sort of stuff that Rosemary just talked about, where it opens the eyes of. So the way in which a poem can open your eyes to something, so that so you're suffering, and because you've got gifted people who have the gift of language, when you read what they've written, it suddenly gives you the words to express what you were not so sure about. It crystallizes your feelings. So poetry has all sorts of ways of affecting and influencing other people. But one of the wonders is that you're able to give other people the words to use to describe something which they've just, in a shadowy kind of way, realized they were experiencing. I mean, when I was young, and I was far too young to be reading D.H. Lawrence, for example. I was read D.H. Lawrence, The Rainbow, at the age of 12. And my great surprise was, because when you're young, you're just beginning to get into adolescence. You think you're the only person who experiences sadness and loneliness. And when somebody else describes it, you are so surprised. How do they know how to say it? So writing, literature has that extraordinary reach that it gives you the words and makes you aware that you're not alone, that there are other people who've been through what you're going through. So it gives you a kind of fellow feeling about how the human condition affects all of us.
Yes, there are a lot of questions from the viewers, and one important question, the theme is that how come in the Singapore school, I'm not too sure the UK, literature and poetry are not encouraged, and it should be a way for students to learn, as you said, the beauty of the language, and also able to express themselves, because now we know, like yesterday's on the primetime television about mental health of young people. If they're able to express themselves, and say they are unhappy with certain things and write it in poetry, then people will listen to them, rather than take an overdose and see the doctors for all kinds of psychosomatic conditions. What do you think then, Rosemary, since you're a teacher all the time?
I think it is a loss when poetry is taken out of the curriculum because of curriculum time, it's been reduced. And I think in some schools, totally obliterated. So we have a generation or some generations already of people not trained, in appreciating the arts. I had a different education. Mine was a classical education under British rule. I studied Latin, read Virgil, we did Wordsworth, we did the Romantic poets, Shakespeare, every year, one book. So it developed our imagination, our love of words, and it made us sensitive to the feelings of people. So this has never left me. I'm still very interested in characters, characterization, things like that. I'm not so interested in technology, but I move along with it.
Mm.
I'm greatly disturbed now that people are studying, have avatars, and then, it is a virtual world of not real people, and maybe that's why people are getting a little bit mentally unhealthy. I don't know,
Okay, all right. I think well, we may want to bring back, but not British rule, huh? No, we have gone through that phase.
I don't think so.
We've gone through British rule. Bak Song, you have gone to that stage, and then you were a well-known author, writer, gift for words, and you write about the branding of Singapore that made you so well-known and famous. What is it about school that you can introduce?
To address your earlier question about the appreciation of poetry, that's a general question, right? Especially among the younger generation. Unfortunately, we have to contend with what is the cultural drift, the direction in which the world is moving. It's difficult for any one of us as individuals or even as a group to do anything about that. We can't stop change. So I look for signs of hope, of optimism, that the appreciation of poetry can be raised, maybe even revived. And one of the recent signs of optimism, some of you may know that just a week ago, Singapore was caught up in this fever about this pop superstar Taylor Swift performing 6 nights concerts in Singapore. Now, Taylor Swift, in her lyrics, many of her lyrics are poetic. She has often spoken of her love for poetry and encouraged young people to read every day. One of her songs, called "The Lakes," is inspired by the lakes of William Wordsworth. After visiting the Lake District in England, she wrote this song called "The Lakes," and there are lines in it referring to wanting to retreat to the lakes, to retreat from the stresses of life, and go to the lakes where the poets went to die. That's the line in the poem. And her next album is titled "The Tortured Poets Department." So I'm hoping that she and other influential figures can bring back, if you like, a greater love for poetry.
Oh, yes, I think that's a good point, because some people ask me, where is this gray line, So when Bob Dylan received the Nobel Prize, some people say, what is Bob Dylan's, is his songs poetry? Well, Dylan said, well, this is poetry, And if your memory serves you well, even Paul McCartney said, well, what we've written with John Lennon are poetry, So what do you think, Professor Oyewole?
I mean, I have a kind of wide view of what literature is. I don't have a kind of doctrinaire view of literature at all. If you listen carefully to rap music, it is wonderful poetry, beautifully rhythmical, extraordinary juggling of words. And it is the most powerful art form amongst the young at present. It is extraordinary poetry. Of course, I'm African by birth, born in Nigeria, and rap music comes straight out of oral poetry that we grew up on. So I don't distinguish it. I don't think it's low life, or I don't think I don't think it's low brow or anything like that. And I have as I say, I have a very wide view of what literature is. So I have a view that that letters are as important as diaries, and I have this view that that diaries are spoken, not to be written, not to be necessarily read by others. So they're very intimate, that letters are also intimate, but they're expected to be read by others. And then that poetry is very, very disciplined, but might also still be relying on what you might have written in a letter. So as I say, and when you think of it like that, literature isn't dying at all. It's just not dying. And then if you look at, I became very troubled because my son, who is 38 now, but when I was much younger, he didn't read as much as his sister did, and he certainly didn't read as much as I did when I was his age. And then when I discussed films with him, I suddenly realized that he knew about films in a way that I knew about novels when I was his age. So he could discuss them absolutely properly. And he knew the discipline of them. So he could tell you where the cameras were. He could tell you what they were doing with the lights. And he could tell you whether the way the person was acting was because the director was telling them to do that and to move. So I hope you get the point I'm making. I think that human beings, that the creative urge is absolutely powerful. It's not going anywhere. And how that creative urge, how it's expressed, might change a little bit. The Arab students and the Arabs, their poetry is all their life. So if you meet somebody from Middle East or from Persia, from Iran, they are into really into poetry. They know it off by heart. But if you look a little bit and you just think, oh, let's look at the UK or something like that, you might want to complain. But actually, creative life is still going on all the time, which is all we care about, really, that people are still got feelings inside themselves. They're finding a form of expression to let other people know what they're feeling. And that's what creative life is about. And that's what the three of us who are poets in this space today, that's what we do, isn't it? We're doing that all the time. When I'm going for a walk and I see somebody walking ahead of me, all the time I'm looking for the right form of words to describe what their walk is like. If I go for a walk and I look at the sky and I see the sun and I look at the clouds, even though I see that every day, all the time I'm struggling for the right form of words to absolutely accurately depict it. And I think that's just the creative urge. But I think people are doing that in different areas of life.
So talking about the Muslims and the Arabs, some years ago I wrote a book and I quoted a Malay poem. It's called Pisang Emas di Bawah Belaya, a simple poem about being appreciate what people have done. If Rosemary lend me a piece of gold, I'll return it to her. But if she's kind to me, the kindness cannot be repaid. So it's about being appreciative, a sense of gratitude. Now, somebody in Singapore read this same thing, this book, and he told me, he reminded him of his time was in Malaysia. And he asked me, can I have coffee time with you? And I agreed and went to have coffee with him. At the end of the coffee chat, he said, I love that Malay poem because it reminded me of his days in Malaysia. And he said, I'd like to give a donation to the Mind Science Center. And he gave $2 million. And that's why Professor John Wong's professorship is from that man, So you see, a poem from a can
do that.
touch someone's heart.
You can do
fantastic. that. $2 million,
Yeah.
And I hope that maybe one day Rosemary or Professor Oyobode or Rick can also have a concert and that is as huge as Taylor Swift, and people will come and listen to poetry. I was asked to write a short song on the rainforest. That there was a time I still remember the trees will never die. I thought nobody would listen to it, but it was used in Australia. And I was so surprised. And it was staged here in Singapore in Esplanade about the rainforest. So my friend asked me, "Is that poetry?" I'm not too sure. I must ask the people like Professor Ayubade, do they agree it's poetry? But I think these are things that are moving, and I hope, as someone mentioned, are schools still doing something for the minds of people, encourage them to be creative. Bak Song, what do you say?
Could I just add one more point about Taylor Swift, which is that she has this song called Marjorie, which is dedicated to her grandmother, Marjorie Finlay, an opera singer who lived together with her husband and Taylor Swift's mother, Andrea, in Singapore in the 1960s. And if you listen to the song, the lyrics are very poetic. And it just struck me that there is a parallel between that song and the poem that I read, which Mango Harvest is a tribute to my father-in-law. Taylor Swift's song Marjorie is a tribute to her grandmother.
Yes,
Yeah.
Just before I came last week, I was the chairman of the Mind Science Center sent me a poem, Mr. Abdullah, to read if all of you care to read. Listen, just a few lines. It's a long poem, and it's about the tragedy or the catastrophe at Gaza. You know, what did we do, Mama, to deserve all these? Will the bombs stop? You know, it goes on and on, but it's something that people express their feeling instead of going out to demonstrate and throw stones at everybody else, but they sit down and write their feelings about the catastrophe at Gaza. I know time is catching up now. I can see that Gia here is in the restive mood. I have maybe just run through quickly with Professor Oyewode. Any lasting words of encouragement for people?
No, I think it's been just to thank you over again, Professor Kwa. I think it's been a wonderful afternoon from my point of view. It's to engage with other writers is always a pleasure and a delight, because you can see where people are coming from, and great writing always comes from the right place. It comes from the heart, and it's genuine. It can't be faked or anything like that. It's always speaking directly to you. So that's being just it. And I'm absolutely sure that our listeners, that they're benefiting just like I've been benefiting, because you have this, it refreshes the inner self. It just does. And you will get home and you will suddenly wake up in the middle of the night in 2 or 3 weeks' time, and you remember a phrase that you've heard that was mentioned today. And that is the power of literature, and essentially a bit like you described, wasn't it? That this guy, you wrote a line, and this guy said, that reminded me of when I was in Malaysia. And that's just exactly how literature works. That it occurs, it springs out from a wellspring, at the most unexpected of times. Something that you didn't even know you were listening to it.
Right. Rosemary, anything? There's one liner to encourage the viewers.
Well, I think if you're already a writer, that's wonderful. But if you want to be a writer, try it, Just start writing. Don't be too conscious of the technical part. Just write. And I think if you write from feeling, from the inner self, I think whatever you write will come out like poetry.
Thank you. Bak Chong?
I think one of the most important takeaways from this session is a deeper appreciation of the restorative power of poetry. So I hope that everyone, no matter how you approach poetry, whether it's through Shakespeare or Swift, Taylor Swift, can come to a fuller embrace of what poetry can mean and can do, and to share that with others, because those of us who have a feeling for poetry, we need to express it more, to tell more people about it, and that's the only way that poetry can be appreciated more fully and have a fuller place in our lives in society.
Yes, I think that's true. And thank all of you, the speakers. Last week, I was reading a poem by an Irish poet named O'Shaughnessy. I'm sure some of you, and he wrote a very beautiful line, and that line has been hijacked by politicians and corporate leaders. The line he wrote in his poem, written about 100 years ago on the music makers, is called, "We are the movers and shakers." Now, the politicians use it for themselves now, the corporate leaders. But when O'Shaughnessy wrote that line, it meant the poets, the writers, the composers, the musicians, and all the artists rather than politicians and corporate leaders. So once again, thank you very much, all of you, for the time here and all those who listen. There are so many questions here. People asking for the books written by Professor Oyo Bode, by Rosemary and Ko Bak Song, and there's so many more. And if you could check into the website of the Mind Science Center to get you more of the information. So you see, although it's just 1.5 hours, it has taken Maureen and Gia more than 3 months to prepare this webinar, and to thank them. And here is Gear again in a restive mood.
Hi, thank you so much to all the speakers today. And with that, we have come to the end of the 9 Tiang Seng Distinguished Lecture Series titled Poetry and the Unquiet Mind. And if you love nature, you're in for a treat, because yesterday we have launched our 3rd Mailer Exhibitions. Mailer Exhibitions is located at Alexander Hospital, and our new exhibitions offer an immersive explorations of nature's and mental well-being. The exhibitions will be open until September this year, and it's free for the public, so please drop by and have a look at yourself. And if you enjoyed the webinar today, please follow us on Facebook, join our mailing list so that you can get the latest update. And as you leave this webinar, you will also be prompted to complete a survey. We hope that you can take some time to give us your valuable feedback. And we certainly hope that this sessions has helped you quieten down your unquiet mind. Thank you and have a nice day.
Thank you. Bye.